1 Samuel, the 17th chapter, verse 15, but David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening and presented himself 40 days. And Jesse, his father, said unto David his son, take now thy brethren this corn and 10 loaves, and run to the camp to your brothers, and carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how your brethren are faring, and take their pledge. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. And David rose up early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him, and he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. Could you say that with me? Shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion. Story of 2 champions here. Here's the first one. There came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. But if you're afraid of giants, that's not going to make any difference. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, what shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine? He wants to be sure what kind of deal's coming down, you see. So he said, now let's talk about this again. The man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel, for who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, so shall it be done to the man that killeth him, and gave him assurance of that. And of course his brothers gave him a hard time. But let's go down to verse 29. And David said, what have I now done? Is there not a cause? Is there not a cause? Ladies and gentlemen, there is a cause in the land today. And really what he was saying there, in is there not a cause, he was saying that giant is but a word. Goliath is only a word. A word of sickness can ruin your day. A word of financial adversity can ruin your day. But what David was saying, that's just a name. I know a higher name. I know a greater name. And then as we go further into this, verse 32, and David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight against this Philistine. And Saul said to David, thou art not able to go out against this Philistine to fight with him. And then he tried to put his armor on him and, do all of that type of thing. David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep. And there came a lion and a bear and took a lamb out of the flock, and I went after him. I like that. And smote him and delivered him out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by the beard and smote him and slew him. And thy servant slew both the lion and the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. We need that spirit today. And David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, go and the Lord be with you. I think he paraphrased that, the Lord better be with you. And so David went forth, and you know the story how that he chose the stones. I want to talk to you just for a moment about something that God has burned into my spirit. It's time for the second wind of faith. It's time for the second wind of faith. And you know that's right when you hear it. Now I want to talk to you just a moment about faith, and then we're going to zero in on David's story. Habakkuk 2:4 said, the just shall live by his faith. Now, the other references simply say the just shall live by faith. Romans 1:17, Galatians 3:11, and Hebrews 10:38. I just opened my Strong's Concordance and looked at it again, and Dr. Strong brings out these understandings of the word faith. It means to be established or established in truth. The only way you can be established as a believer is to be established in truth. To be established in truth, to trust or to be trustworthy. You see, truth is the basis of all true faith. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. It means to be steady. It means a stability, fidelity. In fact, I just quickly looked in a little small dictionary we have, and that word fidelity simply means, it's another word for faith. It means faithful devotion to duty, loyalty, accuracy of reproduction. Interesting. You see, our fruit looks like God because his faith in us produces good and godly fruit. You shall know them by their fruits. And that's a very biblical principle. So fidelity, faithful, or to be filled with faith. When you say God is faithful, God is wall-to-wall faith. He is full of faith. All right? So full of faith, thus steady and stable and stability. All of this goes into the meanings that we discovered anew about this word faith. The just shall live by that faith of God that is established in him, that has established him in truth. If you're living by faith, you trust. You don't tremble, you trust. It's to hold steady. It's to be faithful, filled with faith. As Abraham was fully persuaded and full of faith, and thus steady and stable, and there was stability in his life. Folks, we need that so desperately in the world in which we live, that every storm that blows through doesn't just blow us away. Sometimes people say kind things about us, but you know, we've been through a few storms. We may shake on the rock, but the rock will not shake beneath us. And so when the principles of faith are established in your heart, it's not just to get a new house, new car, new suit of clothes, or a better job. And yet these are powerful byproducts of trusting God. But it's that something that holds you steady when Satan has fired his best shot. I mean, when that letter in the mail was not a check, I mean, it was a challenge. That when something that you're deeply involved with, and all of a sudden it just seems like everything, the carpet is pulled out beneath your feet, then you find out what kind of faith you have. I mean, was it hype? Was it just I got all excited? Or is it really a heart faith? So it's to be full of faith, steady, total trust in God. You see, true godly Bible-based faith, listen to me very carefully, because this has given faith a black eye. True godly Bible-based faith is not magic. True Bible-based faith is not witchcraft. It's not white magic. It's not luck. I like what Brother Schambach said. I use it quite often. He's preaching on the radio and he said, yeah, I see some of you with your rabbit's foot. He said it didn't help the rabbit and it's not going to help you. True godly Bible-based faith is not magic. It's not witchcraft. It's not white magic, as some people say. It's not luck. Faith is being right with God. Living by faith is my believing and standing and trusting on a word or a promise from Almighty God. Years ago, there used to be a little flurry. I guess they're still out there somewhere. You promise people. You need to be deep. You need to teach and preach only history and facts and, and you people are in some kind of a twilight zone preaching the promises of God. The Bible said God has given us exceeding great and precious promises, that by these we might be partakers of his divine nature. I'm telling you, God did not fill this book with promises on a slow day in heaven. And so real Bible-based faith gives us the ability to live daily. I mean, you need help just to live every day. Just everyday life. To face crisis situations, to meet special needs, to respond to the unexpected. That you're not afraid of sudden fear, things that are unexpected. True Bible-based faith is not to force our will or our emotions or our plans or our intentions upon others. Faith is not manipulation of others. Even in a business deal, God has the ability to bless both parties. One person doesn't have to be destroyed so that a believer can be blessed. God knows how to touch all lives in a transition. But I think I need to say this. I know one man used to be in the church. He came to me one day and he said, Pastor, I want to tell you something. God showed me that woman over there is going to be my wife. And I blinked my eyes because there's only one woman that he could be pointing to. And I said, sir, there's a serious problem here. She's married to somebody else. Well, yeah, but he said, God told me she's going to be my wife. I said, it'd be the first time in God's history he got his wires crossed. I want to when you preach as strong as I preach in some areas, I also have to tell you the whole picture and the whole truth. This church is here because of genuine Bible-based faith in God. Our being in this home away from home is because I believe of sowing much seed in our Bible-based faith in God. But faith is not to force my will or your will or our emotions or our plans or intentions upon others. Faith is not manipulation of others. It's not magic. It's not witchcraft. It's to be established in truth, full of trust in God and His Word, full of faith, faith-filled. You see, as Abraham, after trial and error, doing it his and Sarah's way, Abraham and Sarah did it God's way. And I've lived long enough to tell you God's way is not a good way. God's way is the only way. Abraham and Sarah decided to do it God's way, and his faith is firmly anchored in God's word, and Abraham and Sarah had that son of promise. Against impossible odds, as the world would say, Isaac was born. You see, faith is to believe with all of your heart, complete assurance, totally trusting in God's word, willing to step out into nothing as long as you know that your faith is based on the promise of Almighty God. And then even if it doesn't work, you say, well, I'm going to do that and everything's going to be all right. Then as you do that and still things don't seem to work, that you don't become bitter at God, mad at one another, that you just say the first report's not the last report, and the last report's not the last report when your faith is in God. I've lived long enough to know that when things don't work out in spite of everything I've tried to do, that God has a better idea. God doesn't have to work it out like I think it ought to be worked out for it to be God. But if we'll trust in the Lord with all of our heart and lean not to our own understanding, God will plan better for you than you could ever plan for yourself. I'm just crying out to God every day, Lord, I put my life, my ministry, this church, our family, Lord, we're in your hands. You call the shots. I don't have to go anywhere. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to be anything. All I have to do is just show up for work and trust in the Lord with all of my heart. And some of you young people, I think you can clue into this because your life is before you. Where do I go to school? Where do I go to college? Where's the money going to come from? What about this? What about that? You trust in God, and God will plan better for you than you could ever plan for yourself. Please believe that with all your heart. God's a good God. I know we were kind of raised with this thing, well, you know, the will of God, that's kind of the pits, but we'll stick with it, you know, because we want to go to heaven. The will of God is not the pits. The will of God is the ultimate thing that can happen in anybody's life. And if we ever needed proof of that, look how God's helped us since the storm and how God's given us such a wonderful home away from home. And we thank God for that. Well, I hope I've covered this very clearly because, You see, faith in God is, God's not a slot machine, and God's not a manipulator, and God's not the mafia. And He's not going to break somebody's leg for your benefit. Only 2 times in the Old Testament is the word faith found. It's found here in Habakkuk, and it's found, I believe, in Deuteronomy. 229 times at least in the New Testament, faith is mentioned. You see, this Habakkuk 2:4 faith shines as a beacon of light in the darkness. It's God's way for all of us to live. Not just in crisis situations, not just in difficult moments, but the just shall live by his or her faith every day of their life. Faith is peace. Faith is complete assurance. Faith is believing with all of your heart in God and in His Word and His promises that God's working the absolute best in your behalf. And I tell you, God can take a terrible situation and make it to be a beautiful situation. As the song someone wrote a few years ago, something beautiful, something good, all my confusion He understood. God can take it if you'll just leave it in His hands. So it's time for the second wind of faith. For there to be the second wind of faith, there had to be a first wind of faith. I don't jog now, I walk, but when my knees were a little bit more youthful than they are right now, I used to jog. And man, I mean, before you broke through into that second wind, I mean, everything in you said, quit, 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 quit. Well, when you broke through, you felt like you could run forever. Oh, you got that second wind. It's time for the second wind of faith for our children, for ourselves personally, for us to rebuild as quickly as possible, for our marriages, for our children, our grandchildren, our church, our city, and our world, and for our president and all the leaders in government, wisdom, protection, favor, and prosperity. It's time for a new level of revival, of repentance in our land. Time for a new harvest. Folks, it's time for the second wind of faith. He's done it before, He'll do it again. Even if God has not done certain things, then you just get ready to rejoice in the first time. But if God's ever worked something supernatural in your behalf, maybe it was an awakening, maybe it was the change of an attitude, maybe you were just totally bummed out about life, and all of a sudden you said, hey, there's a different way to live. And God turned it all around for you. It's time for a second wind of faith. That's what God spoke to my heart. Now, it's time for a second wind of faith. What about that? You see, faith in God makes the difference in every situation. I don't know how people can live without faith. You need faith in God to work on a job, to be married, and your relationships with your children and friends and so on. This is not our deal, it's God's deal. And I found out sometimes you get all frustrated with somebody. If you'll just put them and you in God's hands, God has a way of equalizing and evening the whole thing out. I mean, there was a time in my younger Christian life, and boy, bad news would come, man, I'd be bummed out for several hours. Or maybe several days. But when something comes that I may not like, or whatever, I just say, whoa, wait a minute. The Lord is the strength of my life. God's my health. God's my strength. God's my prosperity. God's my everything if I know my heart. So you see, faith in God makes the difference in every situation of life. The just shall live by faith. Have faith in God was a direct commandment of Jesus. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Faith is not a good idea. It's the only way to please God, according to Hebrews 11:6. Your faith can move mountains of impossibilities in your life. It really can. And it's doing it every day. Now, go back to a time in your life when you took a promise from God's Word and you faced an impossible situation, but faith brought you through. The lawyer said it couldn't come through. The banker said it couldn't come through. People said it couldn't come through. The courts said it couldn't come through. Every voice said, no way, no way. But you took one simple promise of God and said, Lord, I trust in you with all my heart. And God brought you through on the high side of victory. Go back to that time in your mind. Go back to that time in your spirit and your heart when there was nothing going for you but God. And as it's been said so beautifully, when God is all you have, you find out that God is all you need. When God is all you have, then you discover that God is all you need. I think of Hagar when she was the victim of a bad deal. Wasn't a good deal, it was a bad deal. Sarah's idea. And yet when she was cast out, God supernaturally took care of that woman. Oh, God's love is greater than any of us could ever understand. Go back to that time when it was not logical. It was impossible. You could not do it. God knows you tried. But in spite of everything, God brought you through. And after all you've been through, here you are in this service today. And you know what? God did it in such a way that you could never doubt it. You know, sometimes I think if this election had come very easy, I think there would have been a smugness, there would have been a pride, there would have been a look at, but I'll tell you, the way this thing's gone, we know who did it. We know that God has done the impossible. And it puts a different whole realm of responsibility upon the church of the living God. Man, I just think back to 1964 when we started. We had nothing. We had nothing. Nothing but God brought us through. Think of a few years later, after much hard work and not a whole lot of results, when I cried out to God and God gave us that wonderful revival and that youth revival. Some call it the hippie generation revival. And it forever changed the character of our church. Our church became interracial. We just began to love everybody. In fact, we were the first church in Fort Worth that took that stand so many years ago. Oh, it may happen under a tent and in an auditorium, but not in a church. But it happened in Calvary Cathedral a number of years ago. I think of how we moved downtown. It seemed like such a good idea. We got downtown. It seemed like God left town and had an unlisted phone number. Man, we went through some years I didn't know you'd go through. And I had to go back and practice and preach and live and believe this word that I'd preached for so many years. But God brought us through. And then God, you remember, many of you were there the Sunday that the mortgage was paid off. A miracle of God. And then, of course, in 93, when God sent revival. You know, God sent several waves. And I'm so glad that God gave us enough sense to understand. Everything's not the same all the time, every time. And then we had the prayer revival, and that touched us. And someone this past week, 2 or 3 people said, during that time of repentance, when Brother John Davis was calling it, you know, some faith folks don't think they have anything to repent about. But I'm telling you, there were some people's lives that were radically forever changed, who got things right with God and dug in deep, and God made a real change in their life. I just want to be open to what God is doing. I want to hear what God is saying. Then I think in 98, death was averted in the life of our precious youngest daughter, Janet, how God helped us in 98. And then in 99, we had the Lighthouse television crisis in Uganda. It looked like the devil was going to steal that station completely. But thank God the other guys are out, and we're in. And that great Christian television station's broadcasting 24 hours a day. It's a miracle. I'm telling you, folks, this church has more miracles going for it. In fact, many met me in the hall after the tornado, and they said, Pastor, don't you worry. I mean, you don't have to look around very far and realize our church was a mess. And they said, Pastor, don't you worry. Don't you worry. We have enough seed in the ground in Uganda alone to build another church. Oh, I feel sorry for folks that sow seed only if they think they have it or if it's a convenient day. You sow in the good time, you sow in the bad time. You sow when it's convenient, you sow when it's not convenient. You just keep on sowing, even as Isaac sowed in the day of famine, and God returned 100-fold. Then, of course, as you know, last year, the tornado in 42 seconds, our church was inoperable and condemned. And then I just look at this year. God's put this thing in my heart of the double. And then on January the 20th, a genuinely born again president, has a good marriage, has character, was sworn into office. the first thing he did was call us all to prayer and thanksgiving. If you have a problem with that, you need to get saved today. Now, your second wind of faith comes when you learn to shout the shout of victory in whatever situation you're in. I mean, can you shout the shout of victory as big as when you're making a good deposit in the bank and when you pass the pawn shop? Need a little help? I saw a sign in one pawn shop said, "We can't change your life, but we'll help pay your rent." That's a high price to pay for that. But you see, David was able to shout the shout of victory because he learned to shout victory in difficult times. When you learn to shout the shout of faith in the difficult times, before the answer, before the finances, before the answer comes through, it's going to make it sweeter when you see it all come to pass. First of all, David learned to shout the shout of victory. Remember, he came into the camp, first thing he did was shout. This kid's crazy. We got a big Goliath out here. His brothers are afraid. Saul's afraid. The whole army's afraid. And this kid comes in and says, "Woo! What an opportunity for a believer." You see, David learned to shout the victory in the time of training and preparation. The shout of training and preparation. David rose up early in the morning, left the sheep with the keeper. Most folks would have just said, they just left the sheep and done whatever. He was already exhibiting leadership. And David said unto Saul in 1 Samuel 17:34, David said unto Saul, "Thy servant kept his father's sheep. And there came a lion and a bear." And I said, I'm not going to risk my life. I don't get paid enough on this job. I'll just wait till the lion and the bear are through, and then I'll just go ahead being a keeper of what's left of the sheep. No, he said, "Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and there came a bear and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went after him," number one, "and I smote him," number two, "and I delivered him out of his mouth. And thy servant slew both the lion and the bear." I tell you, this is preparation for leadership. When you see the devil tearing somebody's head off or somebody's life up, you pray for them. You don't criticize them. You don't turn them over to the lion. You don't turn them over to the bear. You remember, but for the grace of God, that could be your life. He said, "I went after them. I slew them." I like that. That's leadership. Secondly, he said, I want you to see the shout of faith. 1 Samuel 17:37. "The God who delivered me from the lion and the bear will deliver Goliath into my hand." There's the shout of faith. See, first of all, there's that shout of training and preparation. All this happened very quickly once he got on the battlefield. But if you're not ready for the battle will kill you. Battle will tear you in pieces. I don't know how long he was in training, learning the shout of training and preparation. He got just as big a bang out of slaying that lion and bear as he did Goliath later on. And now the shout of faith. "The God who delivered me from the lion and the bear will deliver Goliath into my hands." There's the shout of revelation that he learned in that time of training and preparation. The shout of revelation. Who we are and what we have in Christ. Knowing that God can and that God will. God took Paul to the backside of the desert and revealed to Paul, as he lifted him to the third heaven, "There's some things that you're going to have to face, but my grace is sufficient. Don't worry about it, Paul. I'm going to bring you through. You're going to face things that many others have never faced. Your ship's going down. You'll have false brethren. You'll have all kinds of things. But Paul, if you just anchor your faith in me, I will see you through every storm." The shout of revelation. Then there was the shout of action. It was all going so well, that training and preparation, the quietness of the hillside, the shout of revelation, finding out who we are and what we have in Christ. Oh, we just love Bible school. And the shout of faith, I know that God's able. The God who delivered me from the lion and the bear will deliver Goliath into my hands. But now there's the shout of action. It all comes down to doing it. But you know what? When David got on that battlefield, he ran to Goliath. I said he ran to Goliath. Sometimes people say, I'm behind you, but I look around, they're so far behind me I can't find them. I'm behind you, Pastor. When David got on the field, he led the charge. He ran to Goliath. He took the battle to Goliath. I had an email someone gave me that some fuzzy-headed professor somewhere in the world has discovered that really what happened was that Goliath had an eye disease that was peculiar to giants of tall structure. And really the story is not as heroic as it seems because the giant couldn't see him coming. And the giant was confused because he had this eye disease. So really this miracle is not the big deal that the Bible paints it to be. Well, Satan's lied before and he lies again, doesn't he? You mighty right the giant saw him coming. He made fun of him. He said, I'm big and you're little. I'm bad and you're nothing. I'm experienced and who are you? You smell like sheep. Ultimate put down for a cattleman. But David ran to the battle. Folks, when the enemy moves in like a flood, don't run from God, run to God. Run to the promise, run to the word of God. And then there was the shout of victory. After all is said and done, Goliath is dead. And that's when most people would throw a party. They would shout. Oh, I'm telling you, it would. Have you heard the shout of victory? I mean, there's a, and you know, right in here, if you'll notice now, the other soldiers pick up this shout. I'm still amazed at my little Maltese dog. I took her out this morning, backyard. And I mean, she's just quiet and she's a little dog out in the backyard there for a few moments. And there's a big German shepherd just across the cul-de-sac. You've heard that loud, throaty, you know, that German shepherd bark. And that German shepherd again bark. My little dog, it looked like her hair stood up. Boy, she whirled around. And I mean, I had to almost catch that little dog. She was going over to tear that German police dog in pieces. Now, she doesn't weigh over 5 pounds, and I don't know what that big dog weighs, but I wouldn't want to mess with him if he was mad. You see, some people, they just don't realize what's going on. There was this shout of victory. Goliath is dead. It's all over. Now we can relax. Listen to Pastor Bob Nichols. It's not a time to relax except in the Lord. It's not a time to say, boy, we prayed and we saw some real victories. Hey, the battle has just begun. The prayer fight has just begun. Intercession has just begun. It's not over. It's just begun. But finally, I want you to get a hold of this. And I'm talking about it's time for the second wind of faith. I tell you, every once in a while, God just puts me back in the ministry again. Man, I look at everything we have to deal with today. I thought things would be slowing down. Seems like they've accelerated. We're facing 4 major building programs. Not 1, 4. Before we get through with all this. And some days you think, God, what's the deal? But you see, there's not only the shout of victory. We made it, we came through, and God's been good to us. There's the winner's shout of being more than a conqueror. You know what David led those soldiers in doing? They went all the way back to Goliath's hometown. They weren't content with a victory on the battlefield. They went all the way back to Goliath's hometown and gathered the spoil. That's more than a conqueror. We quit too soon, don't we? We get all excited about a little victory. Saints, the battle's not over. The battle's just begun. Let's go get the spoil. I said, let's go get the spoil. Let's go get the harvest. Let's see the rest of what God has for us. Amen. Oh, don't be content with a little breakthrough. Don't be content with a little victory. Let's take it back to the enemy's camp. Let's take it back to Goliath's hometown. And someone asked me this last week, well, are you local? I said, oh yeah, very local. And I kind of got I felt like a wind of God in my spirit. I said, praise God, I was born in this city. Went to school in this city. Associate pastored in this city. Of course, I've traveled in many different parts of the world. And then God used me to raise up a church. And here, we started in 1964, so here we are. And God put something in my heart. There's something of territory in my spirit. God said, if you'll stay, I'll bless you. If you'll stay, I'll bless you. And there's been more than one prophecy that said as it was in those difficult days, those of faint heart left. God said those that stay will be blessed, exceedingly blessed. I mean, you're just setting yourself up for an exceeding great blessing. I said you're setting yourself up for an exceeding great blessing. They didn't just shout the shout of victory. They said, we're going to the enemy's camp. We're going back to the enemy's camp. We're going to Goliath's hometown. And we're going to gather the spoil. Oh, in the name of Jesus, I'm in a gather the spoil spirit here today. Folks, you've sown and you've sown and you've prayed and you've prayed and you've held steady and you've done this and you've done that. Be not weary in well-doing. It's time for the second wind of faith. I said it's time for the second wind of faith. Get a hold of that. We're not all on the same level facing the same things, but wherever you are, get a hold of this. It's time for the second wind of faith. I'm going to tell you, when God spoke that to my heart, I almost exploded. I'm coming home, now I'm calling on the phone. I called Joy on the phone, and I said, it's time for the second wind of faith. It's not time for defeat. It's not time for retreat. It's time for the second wind of faith. I said it's time for the second wind of faith. If he's done it before, he'll do it again. Praise be unto God. Thank God for 93, but 93 is nothing in comparison to what God has for us. It's time for your second wind of faith. Fan that flame. The other day I thought the fire was almost out, and I just poked around a little bit, and the flame I said, oh, that's the way God wants us to be. When it looks like our flame is low, the Spirit of God just pokes us a little bit, moves around a little bit, and all of a sudden the flame begins to burn again. The promise of God begins to burn again. The hope, the faith, the love, the zeal. Life is worth living. No matter what has happened, life is worth living. God is on the throne. Prayer changes things. It's time for the second wind of faith. Time for the second wind of faith. Yeah, preacher, you just trying to stir us up again. No, I'm worse than that. I want to revolutionize your life. I want this message to righteously haunt you. I want you to wake up in the middle of the night singing, it's time for a second wind of faith. No matter what you're facing, no matter where you're going, no matter what's happening in your life, it's time for a second wind of faith. Businessmen come to me the other day, said, man, things are rougher than they've ever been. I don't understand. And we prayed about it. Man, he came back the next service. He said, God's turning it all around. It was time for a second wind of faith. It's time for a second wind of faith in your health. It's a time for a second wind of faith in your visions and your dreams. It's time for a second wind of faith. The just shall live by his or her faith.